Hi, everyone. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Katarna. This is the Exemplary Catholic Leaders Series. Today, I have a very interesting guest, Joseph Valentic. He's the president of the Growth Advocate. And we're going to talk to him in a second here. But before we do that, I just want to mention that at the Catholic CEO, we offer a whole range of services, and you can check us out on our website, thecatholicceo.com. We also have a project called thecatholiceconomy.com, which is a very interesting way for Catholics to find each other, to do business with each other. I think that's perhaps one of the ways we even met Joseph. I'm not sure exactly, but I think that's probably what happened. So don't forget to check that all out, thecatholiceconomy.com. And we are interested in providing a forum for Catholics to be, I guess, exemplary Catholics, to be impressed, to be faithfully informed about what other Catholics are doing in business and in the Catholic faith. So my guest today, Joseph Valentic. Joseph, how are you today?
Fantastic. Great to be here, Henry. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah, it's great. We're getting to know each other a little bit. We've had a couple of calls in the last few weeks here, and we're interested to continue talking with you. So, Joseph, in this series, people are interested in, you're a Catholic. You've been on a Catholic journey throughout your life. Could you tell us about that? We want to hear about your business pursuits as well, and how you're integrating your Catholic life and your faith into your business. But how did it all start? Where are you in your Catholic journey?
So, for me, I think it's not too dissimilar to a lot of Americans these days, where maybe in the early days, I was a cradle Catholic, and I was in a family that didn't really practice the faith, even though they sent us to some Catholic schools, more just because they were private schools. And so in the early days of my life, I definitely got some Catholic influences that I definitely feel helped me along my journey, particularly being an altar boy, for example. The time on the altar was my only real catechesis, because I didn't see anything at home. In the school I went to happened to be one that was not a great place for authentically teaching, shall we say. And so, as I left the high school years, it wasn't hard to wander and drift and move on and do my own things. And then it was in my 20s that, I met and got married to a wonderful Catholic lady who, kind of, her and her mom kind of pushed me and said, hey, you got to be more faithful to what we're doing. But it still took me quite a few years, to be honest, to kind of go along that journey to really make the faith my own. And it was probably when I was probably about 30, where I finally kind of came to God and said, okay, I've tried it my way for a long time. Maybe we can try it your way for a little bit. And as God does and is faithful, he gave me a great conversion at that time. And it's been 25 years since. And the journey that I've been on since then has been amazing. So my wife and our journey together has resulted in us having 9 children, 2 with the Lord and 7 with us. And also, thank you. And also being blessed to have our first grandchild this past year. So the generational impact is growing. So it's really been amazing to see that. Over the course of those years, I've definitely, I won't say I haven't left the journey. I'm still on the journey, right? And so
Yes.
It's this constant process of discernment as you're going through your life, right? And it's this constant process of God lets us make our own choices, and he also lets us find out whether or not they work.
Yes.
You have to go down the wrong path to get back to the right path, right? So
Yes.
it was, for much of my career, I kind of went through a cycle of the early days. It was all about being me and being self-actualized, regardless of my family, and not being the best father and husband. And then when I came back to the faith, God kind of showed me, no, you're a father and you're a husband. You need to balance those things in your life. And so I started balancing them, but I kind of went too far the other way. I kind of went like, well, I'm just going to kind of check out of my career, or just kind of keep a baseline and try and just balance everything. And it took me many years to figure out that that wasn't the best use of my talents, or what God wanted me to do with my talents, because he wants us to be the best we can be in all areas of our life, right?
Yes.
Not just faith, not just business, not just family, but all of it. And so I've been on a journey the last 5 years in particular to try and understand what that means for my life and how to apply it in my business. And probably about 3 years ago now, I came to a critical juncture in my business where I shouldn't say my business, in my career, let's put it that way. I happened to be with a younger company that was failing at the time. And it was an important stop in my career because it gave me certain skill sets I didn't have before, and it's great. But after 2 years with this company, it was clear they weren't going to make it. And so I had to make some interesting, challenging choices. So I was blessed to have a mentor from years back that was a big advocate of praying to St. Raphael, the Archangel, for all your business, okay, and to guide you. Mm-hmm. And so I happened to call him up, and I'm like, actually, he happened to call me. And he said, Joe, what's going on? I said, well, John, it's not real good right now, this, and that. And he says, Joe, you need to start a 54-day novena today. And I'm like, okay, John, I think you're right. So I put out and said, okay, Lord, I really need some clarity here. Okay. And so I kind of put before God, I said, I got three options. One, if there's a reason I'm supposed to stay with this failing venture, if there's something that's still there, let me know. Two, I had already started interviewing with other jobs. I had some very active things going on. Or three, do I start my own business? Okay. And the last one is something that was in the back of my mind for years, but I was very reticent to do it because I didn't want to put my family at risk per se, unless that was really what God wanted me to do. So lo and behold, God closed the doors. The company that I was with just stopped making payroll, and it was like, nope, not going to happen. Mm-hmm. All three of the jobs I was interviewing for all just stopped. They just, nope, we're canceling this job. We're canceling. It just went away. Mm-hmm. And then, thanks be to God, on the 54th day of the novena, I signed a contract for the first customer for my business on the 54th day of the novena.
That's so amazing. The 54-day Rosary Novena, I've done it too, and so have so many of my friends and associates, and everybody tells me the same thing. It's almost a miraculous, well, it is a miracle, but on the last day, and in the 54-day Rosary Novena, for those who don't know, for the first 27 days, we are asking, but in the second 24 days, right, Joseph, we're thanking already for the solution. And then the solution emerges on the last day. So I love that story. And I there's so many things I wanted to catch up with you on with regard to this whole story. God closed all those doors for you, and he opened the other one of starting your own business. And just before we get to that, I wonder if we could talk about the conversion experience. Out of curiosity, many people have asked, what exactly happened to you in that conversion experience? Could you go back to that just for a moment? And then I'd like to pick up on the business startup that you did. But the conversion experience when you were about 30, this is interesting. How did that happen? And what was it like?
Well, so for me, the preceding years of my life were candidly very selfish. And that selfishness really put my wife and my family in a bad position. I was not being a good husband or a good father in terms of being loving and supporting and being there. I went from one job and one thing after another where I would let my career consume me, basically, right? And so, and I eventually got to a point where I was literally physically ill from having run myself ragged at both ends of the spectrum, constantly trying to do things, and literally came to a point, a crashing halt, where it was like God finally got my attention. And it was like, and a very good friend of mine, I told him some of the challenges I was going through, was courageous enough to say to me, he said, did you ever think God's trying to get your attention to show you what he can do with your life? And Henry, the moment that man said that to me, I had a peace come over me that I've only felt a handful of times in my life. It was just a complete, total peace. I knew what he said was the truth. And that began my journey. And I went through a process of, with some of my friends, starting to learn about the faith. And amazingly, my friends that asked me this were former Catholics that had actually left the Catholic Church and were in different Protestant churches. So they were trying to kind of pull me along their same path. And as they were pulling me, my gut was telling me I didn't want to leave the church, but I was also struggling with the differences. Why are these guys telling me this? And I don't know the answers, or I hear something different. And so providentially, my wife and I were about to send our first daughter to school, and we were looking at Catholic schools, and we were in an open house. And my wife says, why don't you go talk to that priest over there? Just tell him what's on your mind, because I literally wasn't sure we could send her, because I didn't know fully if I believed enough to send my daughter. So I was blessed to connect with a young priest at the time who was a former accountant. Got the call later in life to become a priest, and so he said, "Listen, Joe, why don't you come to RCIA, Adult Catechism, and just to get refreshed with the faith, you know?" And I went from having major doubts to literally every open doubt I had over a course of 6 months. I felt the Holy Spirit kept telling me, "Cool your jets. I got the answers." And every single week, piece by piece by piece, whether it was his catechesis or being introduced to, frankly, a lot of great convert theologians like Scott Hahn and Jeff Cavins, and some of these people that came to the church on fire answering these questions. And literally within 6 months, I went from major doubts to priest asking me if I wanted to help teach catechism for the adults.
Wow.
And it was an amazing time in my life. And again, as God does, we can't see his path and how he's going to weave things together. But all of a sudden, I'm teaching catechism, and I'm doing so in a way where I can now answer converts' questions because I asked and answered them all myself, you know? And so it was really fascinating to see, right?
Yeah.
And then along that path, I also met some wonderful, faithful cradle Catholics that brought me into other devotions and things in my life that helped me continue on that path of growth, and, you know, launched just countless blessings in my life. And so that's
it's amazing. And I'm going to tell you that you're about the third or fourth person that we've interviewed in this series who has told a similar story of, you know, career capturing us, moving at high speed, ambition, all of these things, and physical health issues or stress compounding, and all of a sudden we're brought to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying, I've heard this, and it's a wonderful story, and, you know, God bless you for that, for responding to it all, and for teaching catechism. I love it. There you are now. You're not only convinced, you've gone through the logic process. You're teaching catechism. It's amazing. Yep. Amazing. Well, then go ahead.
This the wonderful priest had a great saying that was really hit me. He said, "A person will not come to God until they've come to the end of themselves." And that's often true, right? You know, between our pride and our selfishness, and we got to find our own way sometimes, the hard way. You know, the prodigal son sometimes, right? Not always, because I've definitely met wonderful, faithful people that didn't make the mistakes I made.
But no, it is so it's amazing to hear this, and so, you know, you were saying then you had all these opportunities that were put in front of you, and you're trying to discern what the answer was. And so God's closing all these doors. No jobs. Sorry, you can't stay. The company that you want to even, but contemplate staying with them. They're going out of business. And so did that leave you then with the concept of starting your own business? I guess that was your remaining answer.
It was my remaining answer. And it's important to talk about discernment, I think, a little bit, because years earlier, God was already planting the seeds. Okay. Before I took the job with the young company, I was literally at the point where I was drafting a website and starting to do this. And then these guys came in, and what was fascinating is it was through them that I became and got my investment banking credentials and my investment banking, official component, which was something I was always interested in my life. So God provided that piece, right? And so then when their company didn't work out, now I was in a position where I could integrate all these different skills in my life. And two other key things happened along that path. Many people told me along the journey, you really have a wonderfully strategic mind. You're able to think strategically, but also tactically, and kind of go back and forth between the two. Okay. And for many years, I sat on the board, and I still do, of a Catholic credit union. And so I had the opportunity to be part of strategy and see a strategy process grow over not 1, 2, 3, 4, but like a 5-10 year process, right? And so I was learning along that path about strategy, but as I was doing that, I was also involved with consultants that we would bring in to help us guide strategy, and I would find them telling me repeatedly, "You have a strategic mind." Now, and so didn't know how to use that necessarily, right? How to crystallize that in business format. So that was part one. Part two was, as I was praying about the novena, about the business, I said to my wife, I said, I think I might be afraid of success. I might be afraid of what happens if this thing actually takes off.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife looked at me and she said, I know you are. And I'm like, oh.
As spouses tend to do, they know us very well.
And so, but it was an interesting confirmation because,
Mm-hmm.
again, going back to the concept of are we really trying to become the fullness of who God created us to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I found in my life that there were a combination of fears and bad habits and, comfort in the middle that was limiting. I was limiting the things, the talents that God had given me, So, once the business was kicked off, it was kind of like things really came together and it really seemed to crystallize that yes, it's time to put all these things together. And that was 3 years ago that I started this business, and literally the last 3 years, each year has been better than the last, and it's been the best 3 years of my career. Okay,
it's amazing. It's amazing. And tell us about what is the business? What do you do for your clients, and who are your clients, and what are you doing for them?
So my favorite clients to work with are what I'll call kind of younger businesses, lower middle market businesses, where you have a business owner that's achieved some level of success. They've got something that's working, but they've hit a plateau, or they don't know how to capitalize on what they've been successful at. And so where I come in is I love to help them really crystallize in their own life, where do you really want to be? Where do you really want to get to? What is your 5, 10, 15-year BHAG for, big, hairy, audacious goal for yourself?
Yep.
Now let's look at your business. How is that going to get you there? How do we have to do that? I love having that conversation and helping them look at how do we turn the vision into an actually executable strategy.
Right.
And so in my career prior, I started off in commercial in public accounting, and then I was in commercial banking. And then I've been in the C-suite seats. I've been at the board level, investment banking, M&A consulting. So when I come to a client, I'm not a one vertical person in terms of here's my one skill set. I can look at a company 360 degrees, literally from all facets. And I may not know like the hyper minutia of your industry and specific things that need to happen, but I know enough to be able to look at an industry and say, here's the core concepts, here's what's missing, here's what's not there. And, so then the strategy piece is something I really love doing. Well, often when we do that process, we come up with a couple things that are missing in companies. And often one of those things is they don't always have the executive team they want at the time.
Yes.
So
yes.
I can provide temporary fractional executive services for them. And the word temporary is really important. My goal is not to be an employee of anybody for a long period of time. Okay, That's really not the goal. That's not what God put me in business to do. But bottom line is, I can definitely help, part time in those to not only get them over the hump, but to help build out what that position should really do and look like, right? So they can get the right people in the seats. And then thirdly, every business needs capital, and so for me, being a registered investment banker, that allows me to help them not just go out and find money, but because I understand the strategy side of it, I can help make sure that that money really meets their objectives, the business objectives, the owner's objectives, their family objectives, depending on what it is. And I can help look at and say, okay, let's put a package together where, for example, I've got a prospect now that very interesting company, great technology in the organic space, and they just assumed they had to give up a bunch of common equity. And I'm like, stop, time out. You don't have common equity necessarily. Okay. Yeah. Let's take a step back and look at this, and so, that's part of what we do. Right. And so being able to look at the whole picture, I can advise them, but then outside of them, because I understand the strategy so well, and I understand the story, I love to tell stories. And so for me, one of the great advantages I have for a company is when I go out and tell your story, I'm not using some cookie cutter deck that some analyst put together. It's me looking and understanding your business, but then it's also me having been on the other side of the table as a lender,
yes,
as a banker, and being able to say to the banker, the investment company, listen, I understand what your objectives are. And so let me bridge that language gap there and say, here's the pluses, here's the honest minuses, here's the challenges we're facing. We know it. Here's how we mitigate them and get you comfortable. and, let's get to a deal. Right. And so, I found that ability to do that has been literally the deal I started my company on. I had to pitch them hard on my ability to do that because they had another investment banking firm in there raising capital for them that had not been successful. And that firm, again, what I would say was using a cookie cutter template built by their analysts, and it wasn't telling the full story. And so when I convinced them, sure enough, once I got in there, told their story, I was able to generate 3 commitments for financing for them, in a short order compared to their firm they worked with months previously. So, it was again, not just for them, but for me, it was a verification from God. You're on the right path.
Yes.
This is what you should do.
This, as an angel investor, I'm nodding my head. You can see me just agreeing with you on all of these things, because we're when we raise capital, and I do a lot of work with startups and have done for 15 years. Our families run an investment fund for the family and so on. What I've learned about the angel financing space, mostly with startups, is you're going after the hearts and the wallets of people, so to speak. Now that sounds trite, but it's true. You need to inspire the investor or even the banker that's going to come in at some point, if they can come in. It's the story, the arc of the story, the kind of the inspiration behind it all, because it's the belief in the founders that really counts for investment. Because the business plan changes, right, and circumstances change all the time, but it's that founder. So this is great. You have all these talents, you've got that strategic sense, but you've been in all those different seats, and so you can bring a perspective. How does the faith come into this? You're not just dealing with Catholics, you're dealing with, I presume, principled people, but
Yep.
What's the Catholic connection in here? Is there one? And how does that work in your life and in your business?
Yeah. So, for me, obviously, I look at being Catholic as being a light on a hill, not to be put under a bushel, right?
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
while I love the idea of working with in dealing with Catholics from a shared values perspective, and the shared passion about what our beliefs are, I also very much work in the secular world, and I love doing that. Okay, because that's I get a chance to witness being a person of integrity, being a person who follows through on what they're going to say they're do. While the clients may not know about it, I pray about every deal that I do, right? And so I pray for the success on it behind the scenes, and I pray, from a meeting perspective, I pray literally the Holy Spirit will open my mouth when I'm supposed to and shut my mouth when I'm not supposed to. Now,
Yes.
I'm still learning how to discern that.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but nonetheless, it's been very, very valuable for me. Okay. I mean, I've literally gone into meetings in the secular world where I took one look at their information, and I immediately thought, after prayer, okay, here's the core objectives that I got to talk to them about, and sure enough, I bring them up, and sure enough, the heads start nodding. Yep.
Yeah.
And so the prayer piece is number one. It covers everything, right?
Yeah.
Number two, and I want to be careful with this. While I've actively worked in my business, God has actually worked on my business more than I have, and I'll tell you what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From my first deal
Mm-hmm.
to every deal and client I've had in 3 years, Henry, there's not one where I went out and said I'm going to go after that company, market to that company, and get that deal. Every single deal has come to me through a combination of connections and referrals from different things, different people, different networks, people I was part of. So I'm definitely marketing myself, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely, but I'm also leveraging 30 years of relationship building. Okay. So, my very first deal came from one of those longtime relationships where he said, hey, this company's having trouble. My buddy's in there. He's not happy. Can you talk to him? Yeah, sure. Let's talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get a knock on the door in my office. I'm in a CPA. I'm in a building owned by CPAs. And I get a knock on the door, from one of the other tenants. Hey, do you do this? Yeah, I do. Well, I got a client who might like to talk to you. Can you talk to him? Sure. And I fully expected, by the way, this was an individual CPA doing individual tax returns. And I kind of figured it was going to be just some small mom and pop business. And it turned out to be this middle market business that was
Interesting.
right in my sweet spot.
Yeah.
And, just is amazing. So God has done more for my business to succeed than I have in terms of how he's arranged things. But to me, this ongoing prayer daily I have to St. Raphael to guide me, lead me to these happy meetings, to the right people, the right places. And so it's like, what's the old saying, you prepare the field, but God brings the rain,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
and that's what I found,
Yeah.
in my,
Well, I loved the story of Saint Raphael because I've read the book of Tobias. In fact, during Lent this year, I reread the book of the Tobias because there's so many things in there. It's such a rich story, and so I'm inspired by this. That this Saint Joseph is the patron saint of the Catholic CEO, and of course, I could say the same thing to you, Joseph. It's amazing. Saint Joseph has done so many things for us.
Yep.
In this pursuit, it's a business, but it's also an apostolate, and he has done things. He's arranged things. It's like, it's not that it's on autopilot, but we almost find ourselves responding to the pace that St. Joseph sets for this thing. And I really believe that. And it's just so amazing. So it's wonderful to hear you say that. And so your devotion to St. Raphael is something that has, well, it's you could say it's paid off. That's crass language for this, but it's also because you are trying to be responsible. You have a family. You want to, you have to provide income and support for your family, and you're trying to get everybody to heaven. So the angel Raphael is certainly definitely helping you on this path.
Yep. I'll tell you, I have a little thesis that, God willing, one day I want to write a book, and I've kind of started putting notes and chapters down. And the title of the book is "The Saints Are in Our Lives." Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my thesis is that even though we pray to the saints for help,
mm-hmm.
by the time we pray to them, something else has already happened to introduce us to them, because
mm-hmm.
they're already active. They're not just sitting there on their hands doing nothing. They're living to intercede for us, right? That's the joy of being in heaven. They're not restricted to who our mortal coils here. So I've started to track in my life the number of different saints that have come into my life. And again, there isn't one of them where I was like, I'm going to go out and find this saint. It was like every single one of them has come to me at the right time in the right place, and so I literally created my own little personal litany where I target different saints for different things, as they've come into my life. Okay.
Yes.
I've learned this from you, so I'm going to keep praying to you for that. I've learned this from you, so I'm going to keep praying to you for that. Right. And it's, I think there's, I was telling some friends of mine, I said, we have the most powerful army in the world. Standing on our wall right behind us, right?
That's right.
And so it's like we need to open up to that and be aware of it and use that gift we've got. So that's something I'm trying more and more to do in my life, is to figure, to leverage, those gifts that God gives us.
Yeah, it's a great testament to how it can work with that army behind us. Tell us then, Joseph, about, I'm thinking ahead here to, you see a lot of clients, you see customers, you see situations. Many people have come to the realization that the culture is pressing in on them. Catholics, they're maybe have an executive job somewhere in a downtown corporate job, or they're employed in a factory or in a manufacturing process or something like that. But the culture keeps saying, you got to do this, you got to believe this, you got to say this. Soon it's going to be inimical to the Catholic faith. And well, it is. We know it. It's that a lot these days. Do you find that? If so, what do you do about it? Do you see that? Is that something that you can touch and feel yourself in your business?
Yeah, no, definitely have seen it and definitely have felt it. And, one of the things that I find in my life is that, while not easy, if you're transparent about your faith and who you are, while it simultaneously could put a bullseye on you potentially, it also tends to attract people that wants to have people they can trust be involved with them, And I want to be careful here because, there's an old saying that says, he who speaks of trust, make him pay cash, So it's like,
Yes.
I don't lead with my faith and say, hey, because I'm a Catholic, you can trust me, okay? But I also don't shy away from it being part of who I am. So I'm not proselytizing people, but I'm just being who I am and letting them know who I am. So,
Yes, good. Yes.
During COVID, we came up with certain issues where, my wife and I felt very differently than many things that were going on. And I was with some certain clients that they're like, well, we got to go this path. And my response was, well, if you want me on board, this is the path I have to go because I just don't believe in certain things and I can't go against my conscience. And it was amazing how the things just kind of worked out where they backed off on pressing and, a year, long time later, we're still working on different things together. Right. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but having said that, everyone's path is different, right? And so I just talked to a good friend of mine who's in a situation where he's in a company where 20% of the people have left because they don't like the politically correct pressures. They don't like the environment. And he says, I think I'm about to do the same, And I said, well, he said, listen, bottom line is if you're already feeling it, then it's time to start praying about it and start discerning,
Yes.
Start literally. And one of the things I love to do is I literally like to write down the questions to God. I write them down. Okay, God, here's my question. Okay. And let it sit there for a while, and then come back to it. And it's funny how those questions will get answered at odd times and odd hours. Boop. It's like,
yes,
well,
yes, I know this. Yeah.
And so but I'm seeing more and more that I believe there's a move of the Holy Spirit happening where God is telling people, listen, you don't have to be stuck into this because this was the paradigm 50 years ago. Okay. We have the gig economy now. Okay. We have the ability to work remotely like we've never, ever had before, ever. I've been working remotely for 6 years, but it's really only the last 2.5, 3 that it's become acceptable fully. Literally, I've worked on, I'm in Metro Detroit, Michigan. I've worked on clients as far away as Dubai without leaving my office, And so it's like, what a world we live in that we can do that. So it's funny how kind of like the genie's out of the bottle now. It's like, hey, I don't have to be in a desk in an office necessarily. If I, it's like there's things I can do. So there's a whole new possibility range that's out there that we need to pray and discern what's God's will for us, right? And reflect carefully on our lives to say, am I really using all of my strengths that God gave me? A, but B, what are my weaknesses that could possibly get in my way if I try to do this? Because we have to understand those two. Okay. During my discernment about starting my business, probably 2 years to starting it, I kept, reading all these books about find your strengths, find your strengths, find your strengths, find your strengths, and in the back of my head, I had this gnawing question that said, well, but if I don't address my weaknesses, aren't I going to run into a wall somewhere, And then I was reading the Matthew Kelly book, and Matthew Kelly said, if all you ever do is focus on your strengths, then you have permanently limited your growth.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You're already, you can't grow any higher. You're capped out. So you have to look at what things do I need to work on, and that's one of the beautiful things about prayer. But it's also really important to surround yourself with good people you can ask honest questions, not just your spouse, but friends and people. What do you think? You know me. What are my strengths and my weaknesses? It took many years for me to hear the message that, hey, you're very good with strategy. Because I was kind of riding the middle mediocre road in banking for many years. I was comfortable.
Yes.
And I needed to hear that from people, right? But I also needed to see that, hey, there were other things that I wasn't doing well. One, I was never a planner. Never wrote down plans, never wrote down really daily plans. I've got a very good memory. And so I would fly by the seat of my pants with almost everything I did, just chalk it up, put it up there, right?
Yeah. It's all in the mind. Yeah.
And so over the last 10 years, it's been a progression. In the last 3 years in particular, where I really got to the point of saying, just, you're not going to achieve what you really are capable of if you really don't plan it, if you really don't start writing it down and thinking about it, and then analyzing where am I compared to that. So it's kind of like there's an old phrase in the sales culture that says, you got to eat the dog food you're selling too. It's like, you can't sell something you're not eating, right? So I'm out telling business owners, hey, you got to clarify your vision, man. Clarify your vision.
Yeah.
build your plan. And I'm over here just running and gunning because because again, it's like, so there's been this process where I've gotten a lot better at the planning piece of it, and it's an iterative process too, right? And so, but I've learned most in that is that anything that you plan, break down into pieces, you can achieve. God willing, you have the time to do it. And so amazingly daunting things can become very attainable if you can break them down into bite-sized pieces that you can do them consistently,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think it was somebody in one of your channels that I heard the interview on where she said, listen, you're doing this, you're doing that, but you have this dream over here, and she said, you can carve out an hour a week. I guarantee you can.
That's it. That's right.
Block that time off, an hour a week. In that time, you're going to work on that dream an hour a week until all of a sudden you find things are traction and growing. And, so it's like, so that's been a pivotal piece of my success, frankly, in the past couple of years. It's been really getting much better at that plan and breaking things down.
It's I love that concept of the plan. I as a consultant, as a mentor, and doing all the things that I've done in my life, used to drive around all the time to see the client, and I'm amazed now how. I mean, I suppose you could say I'll never do that again, and I'm sure I will at some point. But generally speaking, I would not have clients in Australia, New Zealand, Poland,
Right.
and all over the U.S. and Canada without without what's happened in the last couple of years. And so I'm inspired by that as well. And I wanted to also just jump into a point that you made about, we can look at our successes and all the business books, and the stores are full of business books, aren't they, that say capitalize on your successes, what's good, what are your strengths, and all this sort of thing. But focusing on our weaknesses, so to speak, it's not a bad thing. It's a kind of a Catholic thing. I've been studying church fathers, and to advance in the spiritual life, what do they say to do? Focus on your predominant fault. Let's say you're searching for virtue. Focus on your predominant fault. Examine your conscience at noon every day, for example, on how you're doing on that predominant fault. And then at the end of the day, when you do your general examination of conscience, it's about everything. But there's the church has given us tools for how to fix things, let us call it. And it's not negative talk. It's about focusing on the predominant fault. So I was fascinated by what you said about that. And that's amazing.
Well, and amazingly, Henry, I actually had to go outside the church to really figure that out. I actually, a couple of years ago, I joined a secular men's group that was a group of men trying to help men to be the fullness of who they could be. And I learned just these amazing processes of planning and breaking things down and having daily accountability, weekly accountability with peers that help drive it. And that's and it was like in a short period of time, I achieved things that I literally wouldn't have even dared to approach in the past. But once I learned that process of breaking it down, it was amazing. So then now I'm combining that with the faith and looking at the question of how I can better do that in my faith, and you find wonderful tools. Like I found this.
Yes.
The incredible planner that really allows you daily to look at my faith, my business, my family, and it's just visible to you, right? Top of mind, John Maxwell, one of my favorite leadership consultants, he says, what you put before your mind is what you become. So be very careful what you put there, but it focuses on the habit of putting it there. You have to have the habitual process. Like you said, at noon, I'm going to check this. At the end of the day, I'm going to examine that. That's, that the intentional process, right?
Yeah. This is so amazing. So here's where I'd like to go next with you, Joseph, is all this experience, all this revelation that you've had, your conversion experience, what you've done in the last 3 years, amazing work. And God has helped you and you've been blessed. What would be some advice that you would give to, let's say a young startup or a middle stage company, like a growth company, somebody that has opportunity? What would you say? I don't know. I'm not trying to narrow the question down, but what would you say to business people now trying to live a Catholic life and be successful in business? That's what we believe. You can be Catholic and successful in business. Believe it. That's our little statement. What What would you say to people who come to you and say, Joseph, what should I do? I want to start a business, but what should I do? What do you say to them?
So I think that they're, again, I don't mean to be trite, but everything's got to start with prayer, right? So
Yes. Yes.
so one of the things that I have come to understand in my life, I don't believe there's enough education on what the Holy Spirit's role is in our lives. And I don't believe there's enough understanding of how important it is to call for and specifically ask for his gifts, okay? And what gifts he wants specifically for us, right? So to me, it starts with the Holy Spirit. Okay, guide me, open my mind to think about this, right? And now as you're going through this, I find in my life that, it's not like all of a sudden I get bright beacons of light where it's like, here's the written words, go do this, Joe, and the voice speaks to me, right?
Yes.
It's an iterative process of discovery, and God kind of peels back the onion, pieces at a time, And what I find for me is I will often look for more than one sign of a direction. I will often look for, okay, and usually for the big things in my life, God has consistently provided like 3 signs that were like, somebody else told me this. I read this, it popped up out of the blue. I bumped into this person, they told me this. There it is again.
Unmistakable signs for you.
The Trinitarian connection, right?
Yeah. Love it.
So, but the Holy Spirit helps lead us, but helps us discern those. So that's part one. Part two is you absolutely have to be humble about asking others, not just God, but who you really are. Okay. So that you can listen and hear and make sure that A, you don't have false humility about your own skills. And B, that you're not over emphasizing your skills, right? So there's a process of discernment there. So it's really important to surround yourself with people that you trust, and people that have the experience that you want. Okay, I've been there. That person's done that. Let's talk. Would you mentor me a little bit? And if you ask the question, you have to be willing to get the answer though, right? So don't ask someone else to take their time and then not be willing to use it, right? And so I'm very cautious of that, and because I know everyone's time is precious, right? And so one of the people I met through your group, I had a conversation with him, and I asked for a second conversation, and his answer was, "Well, what specifically do you want to get into?" Okay, and the hint was there of, okay, don't waste my time, and it was polite and tactical, and he was right. And the more I thought about it, I said, you're right. Okay, here's what I want to focus on, because your time is valuable and I really appreciate you taking the time. Okay. And so, and then, and we clicked on something that really was an ideal connection for the two of us, right? So it wasn't just, let me just take your time, right? So that's part of it. 3, again, the writing piece of it. Okay. Literally starting with the whiteboard of what's on my heart and what's on my mind. Okay. What really moves me. Okay. One of the great questions that I tell people to ask is, if money was not an option, if you didn't have to worry about money, how would you spend your time?
Yes. Great question.
Okay. Really think about that, and then say, okay, so maybe I'm not going to be a rock and roll singer tomorrow, but maybe my love of music can correlate to, I want to be involved with producing it somehow, or maybe I'm doing this or that, so it's like those things can spark things in us. And like, for example, part of my discernment road was, I came to understand, for me, that I am almost perfectly equally split, creative and analytical. Okay. I can sit down and talk to you about the aesthetics of your website, the color content, the wording, the creativity, and I can be spot on and relating to you. But then I can turn around and say, okay, now let's talk about the economics of your per click rate, and talk about this stuff as well, right? And go back and forth. Well, it's kind of an odd place to be in, because a lot of people tend to gravitate more heavily to one side or the other.
Yes.
And I don't. I'm kind of down the middle on both of those. And so, but that plays well into my overall business vision of being able to look at holistically somebody's business and also their life personally, right? And so I had to discern that about myself, because most of the jobs I was doing were on the analytical side, because it was very functional and natural. Okay, put the numbers here, be an accountant, be a banker,
Yeah,
you know,
be analytical. Yeah,
you can do these things.
yeah, yeah.
Harder to figure out how to use the creative side. Not quite as clear and a little more dangerous and a little more like scary. Scary. How do I use that, right?
Yeah.
So, discerning who we are can come when you do kind of whiteboard exercises and you ask these big questions, And another big question is, hey, I'm standing there at my funeral as a ghost. What are people saying about me?
Yeah.
What are they saying
Great
about
question.
me? I read this in the Father Larry Richard book, and I was like, man, it's a powerful question.
Yeah, that's right. It's an image that, it's pretty stark. You put that in front of you and say, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Better change my life now.
So that exploratory process is very important. Now, part two is, and this is where this men's secular group I was part of, I learned a lot, but of course, the fact that the faith was missing from it had made it inherently limited for me, right?
Yes,
While I could talk about my faith, there was no way to really fully integrate it. So I said, listen, we need to look at ourselves for who we are. We are mind, body, and soul.
Yes.
We're not one of. Okay, and so as you look at the question of who should I be, what should I do in life, it's not just your skills. You have to look at the question of what's my physical condition, okay, and am I doing things there that are hurting my growth potential because I'm not living and treating my body as a temple of God? Am I I could be the deepest prayer warrior in the world, but if I'm exhausted and falling asleep half the time because I'm overweight and I'm tired and then I'm diminishing that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And conversely, there's the other end of the spectrum. Of course, we don't want to be vain about it either. It's not about vanity, but it's about, hey, if I can do things to functionally have more energy and give more of myself to my mission and to God, I'm going to be more successful. That's just what it is, right? So as we look at what we can do or should do, kind of discerning how does our mind, our body, and our soul integrate in that path together so that it's not one or the other. And, pray about that and look at your life and self-reflect. Things will pop up where it's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, then, for example, for me, it's like, I launched the business, several things I had to commit to. One was it's going to be treated like a business and I'm going to be in the office at X time every day.
Yes, the discipline. Yeah.
But simultaneously, because it's my business, I'm not starting the business till 9 o'clock in the morning. And I'm going to start my day with exercise, prayer, reading, writing, going to mass some days, and I'm going to alternate those things in a way that helps keep me mentally and physically healthy so that when I walk in, God willing, nothing happens out of my control. I'm the best person I can be all around to do what I have to do. And I have found myself to be so much more productive at work doing that, because the temptation is I just can work and work and work and work and work, and you can't, Yeah. It's a lie that we love to tell ourselves.
It's a lie and it's a trap. It's when I work with still some secular clients still in my life, and sometimes the answer seems to be, let's pile it on. Let's really, let's burn the midnight oil. Let's put on the hour, add the hours, add the days. It never works. And I've been, people have chuckled at me in the last few weeks. I've been saying to people, 35 hours a week. Now I'm being a bit arbitrary, but I'm saying, don't you dare run your Catholic business on more than 35 hours a week. But the point, not so much the hours, but it's this balance that you speak of. I love this idea. I come from a family business, multi-generation family business. And so I grew up at the sort of at the feet of my dad and my uncle and my grandfather, talking about the business. I wanted to ask your opinion on, family business and young people. Let's say you've got a high school student age person in your household, your family. What would you say to them about, starting a business and being independent of the culture that way? Like, what would you say in that respect, Joseph?
So I love that idea, to be honest. And so in one of the generational differences, I barely knew what my dad did growing up. Okay. He went to work for a car company, right? So, Henry, having children and family and inspiring them to look at the possibility of having their own business as opposed to going down a traditional path of going to college and going a career path, is really something that excites me. And having 7 children, I've got a variety of children. So I've got one daughter who's PhD bound, and that's her path. She is
Yes.
academic, and it's her. I've got another daughter who we initially tried to force into the college education side, and it was never her. And now she's a massage therapist, and it's just who she is. She just loves to help people. So I've learned with 7 kids to see that it isn't about this. They don't have to follow a cookie cutter path. They have to follow the skills and things that God gave them. And so if you have a business yourself, it's important to talk to them about that. Let them see you doing these things. Let them see you making these choices and becoming independent. And then I've also learned that, children like to do their own thing. So they won't always come to you for advice. Okay. So,
That's right. What does my dad know?
Sometimes you just have to be a witness, just by your example. But other times the conversations will happen, and one of my favorite quotes is, from Mark Twain. When I was 16, I thought my dad was an idiot. And by the time I was 22, I couldn't believe how much smarter he had gotten.
That's right. I love that. It's a great analogy. Yeah, and we're both dads, so who knows? We may have experienced something like this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, no doubt.
Yeah.
I tell kids I'm from Detroit, and so cars are in my blood. And when I bought my first car, I had to do it on my own. Didn't let my dad do it. And so I bought this Formula Firebird, and I was all excited for it. And the car only had a 2-barrel carburetor, so the car had no get up and go.
No pickup.
No pickup. And my dad afterwards, like, son, got a 2-barrel carburetor, huh? Too bad. Maybe you could ask me a question.
This is great. No, it's so amazing. I love this analogy, but what you're saying though is important, I think, for everybody to hear. It's that we can demonstrate our capacity to be in business. We can show our children. All our children are going to be different. They each have different charisms, different gifts from God, but the wise parent discerns that and can help guide them. And multi-generational family business, it's a thing that I think Catholics increasingly will need to do to resist the culture a bit more and to be independent of it. And so, you're heading along in that direction. I was going to ask you one last question before we move towards our natural conclusion here. And that is, what are your clients saying to you about the prospects, let's say for the next year or two, economic prospects, cultural, the odd stuff that's going on in the world? What are they saying to you about it? And what are they worrying about? You have a vantage point. I'm just interested to know what you think.
It's different by industry. Okay. But as a whole, the commercial customers seem to be kind of holding their breath and just saying, if we just keep pushing forward, it's going to all be okay.
Yeah.
And
is that hope as a strategy?
yeah. It's like, and so I'm not sure it's a wise strategy. And for some of them, we've definitely had conversations where, okay, how do we look at your capital structure to make sure that you can bridge the gap if the volumes aren't where you want it to be?
Yes.
And making sure that your lender or your capital sources understand what your needs are, and that you may have a ride here to go through. So it's like better to approach those things ahead of time than to do them in the back end. I tell people, the best time to seek capital is when you don't need it.
Absolutely.
Right. And
so.
Definitely been coaching some to try and get them to look at that and say, hey, how can we put together the package you need to get through the next hurdles here potentially, because there's going to be there's no two ways about it, right? There's too much economic uncertainty and too many fundamentals that are broken at this point in time that we would say there has to be consequences from them. How long they last to be determined, but there's some real challenges.
Yeah, that's great. Well, there's obviously a lot more we could talk about, and I want to continue this conversation at some point with you. But sure. In the meantime, you've said some important things for us today. Where do we find you? Where do we get your information? You need clients, and if somebody wants to engage with you, where do they go to find you, Joseph?
Yeah, so I have a website that's thegrowthadvocate.com. Again, thegrowthadvocate.com. The word "the" is in there, and on there is my contact information. My email is joe@thegrowthadvocate.com, and obviously, please let me know if you email me that you saw me here, so I can thank Henry appropriately, and also know the context from that. But the website is one of the things I did for my business as an aside is I took the website very seriously.
Yes.
A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people will put up some fluff post site. If you're going to put communication up anywhere, make sure you take it seriously and make sure that you use resources that can help you to have good content, and it'll give you much more credibility if you do.
Yeah, that's good. Well said. Well said. Well, thanks, Joseph. It's been wonderful to have you today, and
Thank
thanks
you.
for being here.
Henry, it's truly been my pleasure. God bless you, and God bless all the work you guys are doing there at the Catholic CEO.
Thanks very much, and God bless you too, and all of your enterprise and your whole family as well. So,
Thank you very
so
much.
thanks again. Well, it's the Catholic CEO Henry Katarna. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time. God bless.
Thank you.
Comprehend